I have no idea what I'm going to call this because I'm dipping into big ideas of narrative and analysis of media again, and I never know how to title these. Hello there, folks. I have some things that I feel like I need to get off my chest because I've kind of been running into them in slightly altered forms in a lot of places lately. I think I'll start by making the following statement. A story is not just its plot. The plot is the series of events that happens. This happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. While a plot is essential to most stories, not all, but most, that is not the end-all be-all of stories. Stories have plots in them, usually, but they also have character arcs. They have themes. They have world building. They have philosophical, metaphorical implications. There is more to a story than this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And as a result, going over the logistics to someone who is taking issue or has concerns about the other areas of storytelling is really irritating. I have kind of talked about this before. I did a video a few years ago about the difference between Watsonian and Doylist readings of material. Not to reiterate that whole video, but just really quickly, the difference there is that Watsonian is an in-universe explanation for something, and Doylist is an external explanation for something. The Watsonian answer to the question, why did this character do that, is going to be rooted in the circumstances of the narrative, the character's history, their thought process, etc. The Doylist answer to why did a character do that is instead exploring why did the writer decide that the character did that. One is addressing everything in universe as if it is self-contained. The other is acknowledging the presence of the author and asking, what were they thinking? So I did that video a while back because I was running into issues where I would express concerns on the Doylist level where I did not understand why certain decisions in some stories were made, and I would get comments flooded with Watsonian explanations giving me these detailed layouts for why it makes sense in universe when that was never what I was asking or trying to parse. So similarly, what we have here that I've been encountering, and I'm not going to say this is a majority of commenters, but it's happened often enough that I feel the need to address it. I am now dealing with a breakdown of communication between the difference in examining or having concerns about the themes or the character journeys, and then having people come at me and either try and debate me, dispute me, or placate me with a plot-driven, the nuts and bolts of the narrative structure answer. And you're answering with the wrong thing. You are trying to answer a math question with a cooking recipe. These are not the same things. I don't know if that metaphor works at all. I don't know. We will move on from that. So some of the specific things that have happened lately that have me thinking about this are concerns that I have expressed or frustrations that I've expressed about things like Vecna in Stranger Things. That Vecna video did a lot better than I thought it would, but there was a certain amount of stuff that I saw in the comments on that. My reservations at Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, appearing in the upcoming Avengers Doomsday. I have run into this, and the ongoing frustration that I have with people continuing to bring up the 14th Doctor, aka the 60th anniversary David Tennant Doctor, in regards to other Doctor Who stories. I will give more context for each of these as I break them down, but we're going to go through these so that I can kind of explain what I have been bashing my head against and am getting just really frustrated with. So let's start with Steve Rogers. The idea of bringing back Chris Evans as Captain America to appear in Avengers Doomsday, which was, well, suspected for a while and fully confirmed with the release of the Captain America teaser for Doomsday. But the very idea of bringing back Steve at all frustrates and infuriates me. For a number of reasons. Like, one of them is that, frankly, it just reeks of desperation. It reeks of Marvel panicking and going, okay, people are losing interest. Just pull together as many elements that have been in successful MCU stuff as possible, including characters and actors that we tied off and were theoretically finished with, such as Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans. And let's pay the Russo brothers an obscene amount of money because we don't know what to do other than reassemble the old team. But he's setting aside the smell of desperation that's all over this. Purely thematically, my infuriation at the idea of bringing back Steve is that Steve's story was done. The end of Endgame had him going back in time, being with Peggy, and living the normal life that he was never, ever going to get otherwise. Now, I will grant, not everybody likes that. Although, at least from what I've seen, the people who don't tend to fall more on the logistical, plot-driven end of things in terms of their analysis than the thematics. Because thematically, the idea is he did the greatest work that he was ever going to do. He stood in the face of death and held his ground, and now he gets rewarded. He gets to stop. He gets to retire. He gets to have a normal life because that's what he wanted, and he will now be rewarded with that. That is character journey. That is thematic. Thematically, his story is fully concluded. And no logistical explanation you can give me for him coming back will fix the problem that bringing him back to do literally anything undoes that ending. Because I pointed that out in my reaction to that trailer. Now, that trailer reaction is exclusive to YouTube members and Patreon supporters. I used to do trailer reactions over in my secondary channel. I stopped because the studio started getting just worse with copyright claims on trailer reactions. There was a long stretch of time they actually were pretty chill about it. They've gotten really bad again, so I don't even bother trying to put those public anymore. But anyways, there were people on the Patreon and YouTube memberships or other places where I expressed this frustration, giving me these things like, well, no, it won't undo that ending because if, first of all, big speculation the minute they bust out the word if, but okay, let's roll with it. If this is just like an adventure that he goes off and then comes back and is still with Peggy, then he still gets to have that life and that ending where ultimately he's the old man giving Sam the shield. That won't no longer be the case. That'll still be the ending. There'll just be new stuff in between when we saw him go back in time and that. Or some people even going so far as to say, well, they are closing out the multiverse story. Maybe this is a different iteration of Steve. Maybe this is not even our Steve, and therefore our Steve is untouched and pristine. And none of these do anything other than ring incredibly hollow to me and feel very dismissive of my frustrations, because it doesn't matter what version of Steve comes back, nor does it matter if you technically don't alter his canon ending, but you still pull him out of his retirement for one more adventure. The point was that he was done. He was finished. This was his reward. To pull him out of that, whether it is literally the same version of him or not, just disregards that theming. It disregards those messages. It disregards that character conclusion. Now, I will grant, when I was younger, I might have been placated by the idea of like, well, as long as it's not the same version of Steve, as long as it's from a different universe or a different timeline or something like that, there was a time when that would have, if not completely fixed the problem for me, would have placated me a bit. It doesn't anymore. Because I at this point, and maybe it's partially because I'm a writer now myself, or maybe it's just age that has gotten me here, but at this point, I am more interested in preserving the thematics and the messages and the character arcs than I am about the logistical knots you tie yourself into as an excuse to ignore all that stuff. In my mind, if you're either going to sacrifice some of the themes because logistically this makes more sense, or if you are going to say to hell with some of the logistics because the theming is stronger, that second one is what I prefer. That is what I want. I want coherent concepts, philosophies, ideas, arcs, and themes way more than I care about buttoning up the logistics. Now, this brings us to the things that I've been hearing for a while now about the 14th Doctor. On the off chance you are not a Doctor Who fan, as simple as I can make it. The reason Doctor Who has been around for as long as it has been is that the show created an internal mechanism to allow for the recasting of the part. It's called regeneration. In universe, the idea is that when the Doctor is in a situation where they would die, instead their entire body regenerates down to every single cell. So they are a completely different person, fundamentally the same inside the head, at least in terms of like core values and stuff like that. Same memories, but fundamentally a different person, allowed to have a different personality, and to then go off and have their own adventures. That's logistically how the show has continued for as long as it has. Now, events in an episode called The Giggle resulted in what was called a bi-generation, where two different iterations of the Doctor existed simultaneously, as opposed to what was supposed to happen, where one ended and the next began. Whereas the normal process would have had David Tennant, who was returning to the part, but I'm not going to get hung up on that whole thing, but David Tennant should have regenerated into Ncuti Gatwa in terms of the tradition of how it normally works. David Tennant's gone, now Ncuti Gatwa's the Doctor. That didn't happen. Instead, there was a whole thing that was done that allowed them to both exist simultaneously. This is something that some fans did not like, and I have defended, it for one very specific reason, and it is what was done with the 14th Doctor. Because while Ncuti Gatwa's 15th Doctor was sent off on adventures and to help people and save the universe like the Doctor always is, the 14th Doctor got to do something that no version of the Doctor has ever gotten to do before or probably ever will get to do again, which is, like Steve, stop, slow down, relax, be with people that he loves and not have to go rushing off to save the universe, because there's another Doctor out there doing that. The end of The Giggle, in terms of the 14th Doctor story, is the story of the one Doctor who got to retire. He got to go, okay, I'm not the only one who's dealing with this. Somebody else, technically a different version of me, but somebody else is going to deal with that stuff. I can be here with people I love, work on myself, and just relax, which I have never gotten to do before. And I thought that was absolutely beautiful. Now, what has happened as a result of some of the stories since then, and one in particular, is that intermittently, and I feel like it started as a joke, but it's starting to come across as something said in greater seriousness. Honestly, if it's still being said as a joke, you need to drop the joke because the joke's dead. You've beaten it into the ground. So part of it is just how long it's gone on. Maybe it's still meant as a joke, but it doesn't feel like it anymore. Where events will happen and fans, or certain kinds of fans at least, will ask, why isn't the 14th Doctor doing anything? Because he is established to still be in the present day. So he is technically around for a lot of the stuff that happens, but he doesn't show up to do anything about it. Now, the big one where this came up is the miniseries, The War Between the Land and the Sea, because this was a story in which Gatwa's Doctor did not appear, which, if you are dealing strictly with the logistics, does beg the question at least a little bit more, because the other stuff that had gone on in Gatwa's 2 series as the Doctor, yes, things got really bad, but you could also argue the 14th Doctor didn't intervene because the 15th Doctor was there. The Doctor was already dealing with it. He did not have to get involved. Whereas the events of the War Between the Land and the Sea are events that take place in the Doctor Who universe, but where the Doctor is not present. This is something that has been done in both spin-offs and miniseries, most successfully in the Torchwood miniseries Children of Earth, which is still one of the most solid single pieces of entertainment that Doctor Who has done. It's really good, it's incredibly dark, and it's only gotten more so as time has gone on, if I'm being completely honest. But regardless, in Children of Earth, it actually was kind of brought up, why doesn't the Doctor come and help? And in that one, at least a answer is posed, and it's more of a thematic answer than a logistical one, which is, I think sometimes the Doctor is too ashamed of us to help. And given the events that went on in that story, yeah, I get why that was said. But the question was begged. Okay, this whole thing is going on. The human race is being threatened. People are in danger. The entire world is on the verge of an incredibly deadly war between these undersea beings and humanity. And it is having direct impact. You can't miss it. It can't be a case of the Doctor doesn't notice because he doesn't watch the news. There is no way to miss that massive amounts of trash fell out of the sky if he's still in England. So people were asking, where's the 14th Doctor? I remember actually getting a comment through all this, was the 14th Doctor really just sitting in his garden? And my answer to that was yes. Yes, he is. Because thematically, he's done. His story is complete. His arc is over. He got to have his happy ending. And any bringing back of him undoes that. And for the record, so far as I can find, David Tennant agrees with me. I understand if theming matters less to you, that it is frustrating to see a situation in which, okay, but that should logically lead to this. I get if that's how your brain works, because I'm trying to be accommodating about this. Different brains work different ways. Different brains fixate on different things. I'm neurodivergent. I get that. But while I can understand the frustration that you might have if you are focused way more on the logistics and the plot beats, the logistical events that happen one after another, why you keep looking at the fact that, but there's a version of the Doctor right there and he does nothing, and that bothers you. I understand your frustration. However, the fact that it goes unaddressed because thematically he's done, he's completed his arc, he's finished, and he gets to have a happy ending, that means that him not showing up, it's not a fault, and it's not bad writing. I could very easily do an entire video about how the overarching phrase bad writing is being used to cover up so many things that people don't like about something, but they refuse to examine why they don't like it. Oh, no. I don't like that character not because they're diverse or they're queer, they're not like me. I just think it's bad writing. Not to imply that every instance of somebody claiming bad writing is to cover up bigotry, though often, honestly, it is. But bad writing is a meaningless term at this point. You have to explain why it is bad. And if your answer to something like the 14th Doctor situation is a logistical issue, you're allowed to have that. But that doesn't make it bad writing, because the writing had a thematic closure. Thematically, character arc-wise, he's done. That is more important, or at least the decision was made that is more important than logistically answering every single time something happens in London why he's not there. As I said, I personally would rather deal with really strong theming and overall notions and character arcs and philosophical ideas buried in the text rather than dealing with the logistics. It's kind of coming back to the old plot hole argument. Everything has plot holes. Part of the reason plot holes are acceptable is if you try and button something up just to deal with all the plot holes, you probably have something that has very little deeper meaning. because you're so focused on the logistics. It doesn't have greater ideas. It doesn't have themes. So since this is what I favor over this, I can understand if you're the other way why this is all very frustrating, but that doesn't make it bad. It makes it possibly not for you. But that's another thing that I have had to get much better about as I have aged. Not for you is not the same as bad. I have had to point this out with things like romantic subplots and cringe comedy, and these are not things that are inherently bad, but I do not like them. They are bad for me as a viewer. I understand other people enjoy them, and that's fine, but I don't. And I will express sometimes in greater detail why not, but sometimes I'll just say this stuff sits badly for me because of me and who I am. You don't have to take, or you shouldn't be taking, something that is your issue with a thing and claiming it is somehow a greater objective issue, like bad writing. Like, if you want to know to what extent I prefer thematic closure over logistical, this actually impacted the end of my own novel. Not really spoilers, only in the broadest possible sense. I'm not going to get into specifics, but at the end of my own book, I ended it in such a way that led some people, including people who reviewed the thing, to not only believe, but just assume as a given that it was a setup for a later book. That it was like a part one in a saga. And it's not. I do have plans to do other stories within that universe. I need to get back to writing on that, but I don't intend to address the same characters. And in particular, the lead character, I have things end where the point was to get him to a place where he has control over his own life and gets to make his own decisions about what happens next. And that includes being free of me as the writer. I don't feel like I have any business dictating what happened to him anymore. Because the whole point for his arc was getting out of situations where either circumstances or individuals forced his hand into an incredibly narrow number of things of what he could be or what he should do. He wanted to be free of that, and the book ends in a pretty open-ended way because now he is, and it is implied very clearly, he will go off and now have his own life and own adventures, but I didn't do that implying that I was going to tell them. That wasn't the point. Now, maybe I could have delivered that in a way that actually made it clearer to people so that there wasn't the confusion that they thought, oh, obviously this writer's going to do more with this character later. Maybe I could have done things to mitigate that problem. But I do think at its heart, no matter how I presented it, that was going to happen to at least a certain extent. Because I wanted to end open-ended because that was where this character's journey was going. And then once I got him there, that's the story I wanted for him. And then I let him go. Because as I said, the point was he's free of the obligations. He's free of the restrictions. And I feel like I undo that by me as the author deciding what happens to him next. Now, is that me saying definitively that I will never revisit this character? I don't know. Maybe. I had like a couple of notions that came up in my head, but I'm like, I don't really like any of these. So honestly, probably not. But who knows? But the point is, I'm just using my own work to illustrate how much the thematics matter to me. How much it matters to me that you honor the point more than the plot. I think a real good go-to example with that, and one that I have used to illustrate other things before, but I'm going to use it to illustrate this, is the ending of Inception. There have been in the past, and I don't know if it still happens, but there have been in the past people who obsess over the ending of that movie. Because at the end of Inception, there's this whole thing about dreams within dreams and what is reality and what isn't. And the lead character has this token, which is a spinning top. And It's something that he used to determine whether or not he's in a dream, because if he spins it and it spins forever and never stops, this isn't reality, this is a dream. If he spins it, even if it goes for a while, but if it eventually falls over, then he is in reality. And so the film ends with him being reunited with the family he's been trying to get with. He starts it spinning, but then he walks away from it to go and be with his family. And the camera zooms in on the top, that wobbles at a few points, looks like maybe it might fall over, but it doesn't, it just cuts to black. And there are some people who have obsessed really, really massively on whether or not this was reality, whether or not the top was about to fall over or not. But it doesn't matter, because that wasn't the point. The point was not, is Cobb, who is the lead character, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, is Cobb in reality? The point was, he has chosen that this will be his reality. The point was, he walked away from the top. That's what matters. Regardless of whether this is the real world or not, this is the world he is choosing to exist in, and that's why he walked away from it, and that's why it doesn't matter if it falls over or not. Because whether or not the top spins forever is plot, but it's not the point. I suppose I should circle back to Vecna, because I brought him up earlier. My big overall frustrations with Vecna, if you didn't see the video that I made previously, he is a villain who showed up in the 4th season of Stranger Things, a show that I had, up until the 4th season, mostly enjoyed. The show prior to that had a very strong Lovecraftian cosmic horror vibe, where there's this entire other reality called the Upside Down that from the very first season is bleeding into a reality like ours. The nature of that was the kind of stuff that I love about Lovecraftian horror. It was uncaring, it was alien, it was strange, and it didn't seem to give a damn about people. It just was doing its own thing and was causing problems. Why? Who knows? Doesn't matter why. What are the characters that we care about gonna do about it? That's what matters. And I felt largely that the first 3 seasons captured that to varying degrees of success. But then the 4th season introduced a character named Vecna, who was far more human, far more comprehensible, had a far more comprehensible motive, and who basically became the avatar for the entire Upside Down. And in that video, I bemoan that. We went from this infinite possibility of this entire plane of existence to, oh, it's just some dude. And while most people got what I was saying, there were a handful of folks who were like, okay, but what if it turns out it's this way about Vecna, so that like technically he's not the embodiment of the whole thing, or like he's actually being controlled by the Upside Down, or this or that. And again, it kind of missed the point that the theming and the core concepts of the Upside Down had already been sacrificed by what Vecna is. And any attempt to roll that back is a band-aid on a bullet wound as far as I was concerned. Because thematically, we went from a story of what might as well be a natural disaster, a supernatural disaster, if you will, where this other plane of existence and its denizens are just showing up. What the heck do we do? How do we survive this? We went from that to knockoff Freddy Krueger. That's not the same thing. And it's not what I had enjoyed up to that point. And trying to roll that back in any way, that won't fix the problem that the core themes and the core concepts and the philosophical notions of what the story we were even watching was irreparably changed by that 4th season. It's not the same story anymore. And it's not one that interests me nearly as much, if at all. But my overarching point in all this is that I feel like in so many conversations, and honestly, almost more so when we start getting into franchises and things that go on for a while, that the notions of themes and mood and tone and character arcs being as if not more important than the logistical plots is getting lost. And I feel like that's not just the audiences. I feel like creators are losing that too. And as someone who is a writer, who cares about themes and cares about the bigger ideas and cares about the bigger picture, that's just depressing. Boy, I should find a better note to end on than that, but I can't. So there we go. Anyways, what are your thoughts on any of this? And again, like, if you care more about the logistics and the plotting than the themes, you're not wrong. But neither am I for preferring it the other way. And if I'm expressing concerns about the themes, please don't try and placate me with an answer about the logistics, because we're not talking about the same thing. But whatever your thoughts are on any of this, drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living, even if you can't help me out that way. Like, share, subscribe, those all help. Don't worry too much about it, though. What I would really like you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I am just running the meetings, and until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Subin Lutfulla, Auntie Kate 808, Mira G, Angry Casperol, Dave Hall, Oliver B, Mystic Shadow, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Melissa Pedersen, Becky Sparks, Ulrich, Twylord, Tracy Scrabbit, Palba Rabajoggle, Sir Didymus is my favorite, and thanking some random folks from the lower tiers of my Patreon: Puck, Lady Sammy, and Eva Bright. Don't worry, the rats are fine. Just thought we kicked the year off with Archie. What you think, bud? He's skeptical.